I've never been big on birthdays. Not because I don't like getting older or eating cake. I actually love cake. But because every year, it's a reminder of the pecking order in my family. And for as long as I can remember, I've been firmly at the bottom. My name's Evan. I'm 26 now, but the story I want to tell started when I was 25, just last year. I don't know what your family's like, but mine? My dad runs things like a Fortune 500 CEO, and we're all just departments under his thumb. My mom passed away when I was 13, and ever since then, it's been just the three of us. My dad, my younger sister Kayla, and me. Kayla's 22, fresh out of college, and she's always been the future. Dad's words, not mine. Growing up, I didn't resent her. Not really. She was the baby of the family, and after Mom died, Dad started coddling her like she was made of glass. She'd cry, and suddenly rules didn't apply. She'd pout, and Dad would hand her whatever she wanted. Meanwhile, I was expected to man up. I remember once in high school, I broke my wrist during football practice, and Dad told me to stop being dramatic because Kayla had a hard week. That kind of thing. It wasn't malicious, at least not at first. Just imbalanced. But as we got older, the imbalance grew into something bigger. Something uglier. By the time I graduated college, Dad had roped me into working for the family business, a moderately successful logistics company he'd started back in the 90s. Nothing glamorous, but steady. I started at the bottom, willingly. I didn't want handouts. I built software tools to improve scheduling, streamlined the invoicing process, negotiated better vendor contracts. The kind of stuff that made things run smoother without fanfare. I wasn't chasing praise, just results. Dad never said thank you. Not once. But he'd brag to his friends at dinner parties about how the company practically runs itself now. Sure, Dad. Like magic. Kayla, on the other hand, bounced between passions. First she was going to be a fashion designer, then a travel influencer, then a wellness coach. Dad funded every new phase. Bought her a professional camera for her YouTube channel that lasted 2 months. Flew her to Bali for a content retreat with other influencers. When that fizzled out, he paid for her to take a 6-month self-discovery trip through Europe. She came back with a boyfriend from Amsterdam and a new plan to launch her own boutique line of eco-friendly luggage. Guess who covered the startup costs? Now, don't get me wrong. I wanted Kayla to succeed. I wasn't rooting against her. But every time she stumbled, Dad would throw money at her like it was Monopoly cash, while I was working 70-hour weeks, keeping his company afloat with nothing more than the occasional grunt of approval. I hadn't taken a vacation in 3 years. I hadn't even taken a sick day. When I got COVID, I worked from home with a fever. Dad said, "That's the kind of dedication this family needs." I thought maybe, just maybe, he meant it. Then came the birthday that flipped the switch. It was mid-October. Kayla's birthday. Dad always threw big parties for her, catered events, live music, custom cakes with little fondant purses or miniature Eiffel Towers, depending on her current obsession. This year, it was at a rooftop venue downtown, all string lights and champagne flutes, and a private DJ playing what sounded like a Spotify playlist titled Rich Girl Vibes. I wasn't surprised. I showed up in a button-down and slacks straight from the office. Everyone else looked like they were going to a fashion gala. The whole night felt like a performance. Guests fawned over Kayla, who wore a white silk dress and made sure everyone knew it was custom-made by a Milanese designer she met during her last trip. Dad was beaming. I stood near the back, nursing a drink and avoiding small talk. Eventually, the cake came out. People gathered. Dad clinked his glass. He gave a speech, of course. He always gave speeches, but this one hit different. "She's the future of this family," he said, raising his glass to Kayla. "A visionary. A creator. Someone who doesn't just follow paths. She makes them. I've never been prouder." The crowd clapped. Kayla smiled like she was accepting an Oscar. I waited for him to pivot, to say something like, "And let's not forget Evan, who's been working hard behind the scenes." But he didn't. He just moved on. That was it. Later, when things died down, Dad pulled out a set of keys and handed them to Kayla. "It's waiting outside," he said. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She squealed, hugged him, and ran off with a few of her friends to see her gift, a brand new Audi, parked in front with a bow on it. I watched through the window as she jumped up and down like a teenager. Then Dad turned to me. "You should think about working harder," he said, not unkindly. "You've hit a bit of a plateau. Don't get comfortable." He reached into his pocket and handed me a small box. I opened it. It was a silver keychain shaped like a gear. On the back, it read, "Grind now. Shine later." I stared at it for a second. Then I looked at him. "That's your birthday gift?" asked someone nearby. Dad laughed. "Well, it's motivational. That's worth more than a car, right?" Everyone chuckled. I didn't. I just nodded, slipped the box into my pocket, and walked outside for air. In that moment, something clicked in me. Something that had been cracking quietly for years, but finally snapped. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just hollow. Like I'd finally realized the truth I didn't want to admit. No matter how much I gave, it was never going to be enough. Not for him. Not compared to her. And that was the night I decided I was done. Not just with the party. Not just with my dad's empty gestures. I was done being the silent engine behind his empire. I was done being invisible. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't make a scene. I just slipped out the back, went home, and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the ways I'd propped up a man who saw me as a spare part in a machine he didn't understand. The next morning, I walked into the office, cleared my desk, and left a resignation letter in his top drawer. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't answer when he called the next day, or the day after that. I disappeared, and let the cracks I'd been patching for years finally start to show. That was just the beginning. What happened next? Well, let's just say the house of cards came down faster than I ever expected. But I'll get to that. The silence after I left was louder than I expected. Not literal silence. My phone buzzed plenty the first week. Missed calls. A few messages from Dad that swung between confused and condescending. One just said, "If you're having a midlife crisis at 25, you should talk to someone. You're needed here." Another read, "Kayla says you're being dramatic." I agree. Let's talk like men. I didn't reply. Not once. I'd spent too long pretending this was normal. Pretending I was just being sensitive. That if I worked harder, longer, better, maybe I'd earn the basic recognition I gave up on asking for years ago. But after that birthday party, something in me shifted. I stopped craving his approval. Stopped chasing the idea that if I just stayed loyal enough, I'd finally be treated like I mattered. But I won't lie and say it was easy. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waking up to a packed calendar or back-to-back calls. No emails to answer, no fires to put out. Just quiet. At first, it was disorienting. I walked around my apartment like a stranger in my own life, uncertain whether I'd made a mistake. But then I started breathing again. And sleeping. Like actually sleeping. Meanwhile, I heard murmurs from a few coworkers I still had on LinkedIn. Whispers of invoices going unpaid, missed shipments, clients growing restless. I watched from a distance as the tiny machine I'd kept oiled began to stutter and stall. I didn't feel guilty, just numb, like I'd stepped away from a sinking ship I'd spent years trying to plug with my bare hands. A few weeks passed. Then one afternoon, I got a call from Mr. Porter, one of our oldest and most important clients. He didn't know I'd left. Thought I was still running logistics. Said he'd been trying to reach the office for days, but kept getting vague promises and no follow-through. He sounded frustrated, tired. Said, "You're the only one who ever knew what was going on over there, Evan. Did something happen?" I told him, gently, that I didn't work there anymore. He went quiet. Then he sighed. "Well," he said, "that explains a lot." It felt like someone had just put words to everything I'd been feeling. But even as the cracks in the company widened, Dad didn't back down. If anything, he doubled down on Kayla. She announced on Instagram that her eco-luggage brand was finally launching. The pictures were polished, the captions full of words like sustainable, innovative, and visionary. She posted videos of herself unboxing samples, explaining her creative journey, and doing photo shoots with pastel suitcases and flower fields. I watched it all with a strange mix of detachment and disbelief. I knew how the business was really doing. I knew Dad had diverted a chunk of the company's operating budget to fund Kayla's startup. He wasn't being subtle about it, either. A former coworker forwarded me an internal memo that said budget had been restructured to prioritize long-term family investments. Whatever that meant. Still, I said nothing. Let it all unravel. But the moment that really pushed things over the edge, the true breaking point, came a month later. It was early December, cold and gray, and I was visiting Mom's grave. I did it every year, same day, same time. Quietly. No fanfare. She'd passed away on December 5th when I was 13, and even though we never made a big deal out of it, I always felt like she deserved a moment. I brought flowers. Sat there for a while, just thinking. Then, Out of nowhere, Kayla showed up. I didn't even hear her heels crunching through the frosted grass until she was a few feet away. "Oh," she said, spotting me. "Didn't expect you here." She was wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my car and oversized sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. I stood up, brushing dirt from my jeans. "Why wouldn't I be here?" I asked. "It's Mom's anniversary." She tilted her head, as if that hadn't occurred to her. "Right? Yeah, I just thought. Since you've been off the grid, or whatever." "I took a break," I said. "Didn't realize that made me a ghost." She smirked. "Dad thinks you're being immature." I didn't answer. She stepped closer to the headstone, pulling a phone from her pocket. "I'm just stopping by for a photo," she said, flipping her hair. "Posting something about Mom. The engagement last year was insane." I blinked. "Wait, you're taking a picture?" "Yeah, duh." She crouched down, angling her phone toward the headstone. "It's for the brand. Like, grounding myself. Reminding people I've had struggles too. That kind of thing." I stared at her. "You're using our mom's grave for clout." Kayla looked up, annoyed. "Don't be so dramatic. It's storytelling. People relate to grief." I opened my mouth, then closed it. I didn't trust myself to speak. She took a few shots, filtered them, then stood and turned to me. "Anyway, you should talk to Dad. He's stressed. I think he's hoping you'll come crawling back soon." "Not happening." She shrugged. "Suit yourself. But, since you're not doing anything, maybe you could help pack some orders for my luggage line? It's been overwhelming lately." I actually laughed. Out loud. A short, bitter sound. "What?" she asked. "You really don't get it, do you?" I said. She frowned. "Get what?" "That I'm done. With you. With Dad. With all of it." Kayla rolled her eyes. "So you're gonna sulk forever because you didn't get a car for your birthday? Grow up." I walked past her without another word. She called after me. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with being a martyr all the time, people would actually want to help you." I didn't look back. Later that night, I got a call from Dad. I let it ring. Then another. Finally, a message came through, just one line. "Need you to come in tomorrow. We need to talk." Seriously, I ignored it. But curiosity got the better of me the next morning. I took a walk past the office, just to see. It was mid-morning, but the parking lot was half empty. Through the glass doors, I spotted two receptionists whispering at the front desk. The place looked off. Not frantic, not chaotic, just confused. Like a machine missing its core piece. That night, Dad showed up at my apartment. I hadn't seen him in person since Kayla's birthday. He looked different. More tired. A little grayer. "Evan," he said when I opened the door. "Can we talk?" I didn't invite him in. Just leaned against the frame. "I'll keep it short," he said. "The company's struggling." I waited. "We've lost 3 major clients. Deadlines are being missed. There are issues with cash flow. It's temporary, but I could use your help getting things back on track." I almost laughed again. "Temporary?" I asked. "Or the result of pulling funds to pay for luggage prototypes and influencers?" He stiffened. "That's irrelevant." "No," I said. "That's exactly the problem. You gambled the company on Kayla's latest identity crisis." He bristled. "Kayla is trying to build something. So was I said, my voice sharp now. "But you never gave a damn about that. You only saw what she could become, not what I already was." He shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "This isn't about favoritism, isn't it?" I asked, stepping closer. "When she got a car, and I got a lecture. When she got a team, and I got told to grind harder. When she gets to post about grief, and I'm expected to quietly clean up everyone's messes." Dad didn't respond. "I'm not coming back," I said finally. "Not to save your business. Not to patch your mistakes. And definitely not to help Kayla ship pastel suitcases to influencers in Malibu." His jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "I finally stopped making them." He stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked away. I shut the door and stood in the hallway, heart pounding. That was the night I decided to stop waiting for an apology and start planning something else. Something bigger. Because watching them scramble was satisfying, but I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I'd love to say I felt triumphant after that night. That telling my dad off in the hallway of my apartment gave me some deep catharsis. But the truth? I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what came next. For the first time in years, I had no paycheck, no backup plan, no real direction. Just a hollow victory and a head full of emotions I'd been bottling up since I was a teenager. In a weird way, that was my rock bottom. Not the confrontation itself, but the silence that came after. The realization that I'd walked away from everything I knew without a clear destination. The kind of freefall that feels empowering in movies but terrifying in real life. My savings weren't infinite, and the rent on my apartment wasn't cheap. The family business had always been my world, not just my job, but my structure. Without it, my days blurred together. I tried applying for jobs in logistics, but every time I sat down to write a cover letter, I felt this ache in my chest. I wasn't ready to jump back into the same world, not under someone else's thumb, and definitely not to rebuild someone else's dream. I started going for long walks in the morning, just to feel like I had somewhere to be. There's something about walking alone in the cold that forces you to think. No distractions, just breath and footsteps. It was during one of those walks that I passed an old warehouse that had been for sale for months. It wasn't anything special, rusted shutters, cracked windows, weeds in the parking lot, but something about it caught my eye. I don't know what possessed me to look it up later that day, but I did. The price was surprisingly low, probably because it was zoned in a light industrial area most people didn't want to touch. I laughed at first, then stared at the listing, then laughed again. Then I didn't stop thinking about it. You know those quiet moments when something clicks and you can't explain why? That warehouse became an obsession. I started sketching out ideas in a notebook I hadn't touched in years. Ideas I'd pushed aside because I was too busy or too committed to the family business. But now I wasn't either of those things. Now I was just Evan, broke, unemployed, and weirdly excited. I didn't buy the warehouse, not yet. But I filed an LLC. I called it Cornerstone. Not flashy, not trendy, just solid. Then I reached out to a few old clients I had good relationships with. Not to steal them. I wasn't trying to gut my dad's business. I just wanted to ask questions. What did they wish logistics companies did better? Where were their biggest frustrations? What problems were they still trying to solve? To my surprise, they answered. Not just politely, enthusiastically. One even said, "Honestly, if you ever start something on your own, call me." You were the only one who actually understood how to fix things instead of just talking about them. That stuck with me. So I started working. Slowly, quietly. I didn't have funding or a team, but I had a laptop, a vision, and time. All the things I'd never had when I was buried in someone else's priorities. I built a new kind of logistics model. Leaner, tech-forward, focused on small and mid-sized businesses that got ignored by the giants. I designed it to be flexible, personalized. I wanted every client to feel like they were the only one on the roster. I spent the next few months living frugally. No more takeout, no more Friday night drinks, no new clothes. Just sweat, planning, and code. I converted my second bedroom into a makeshift office and set rigid hours for myself. I wasn't working for my dad anymore, but I wasn't going to slack off. This time, it was for me. I launched the Cornerstone beta in late spring. Quietly. No press, no grand opening. No dramatic social media post. Just a handful of early clients and a promise. We'll handle the heavy lifting. You focus on what you do best. And people responded. Not in droves, but enough. Enough to pay the bills. Enough to breathe again. A month in, I got an email from Mr. Porter, the old client who'd called me during the first wave of my absence. He said he'd heard I was back in the game and asked if I'd be interested in taking on one of his new contracts. I was. That contract turned into 2, then 4. Cornerstone wasn't flashy. It wasn't viral. But it worked because I worked. Because I cared. And because I knew what it felt like to be treated like a cog instead of a person. For the first time in my adult life, I felt proud of something that had my name on it. Meanwhile, I heard things about my dad's company. Through the grapevine, mostly. More clients dropping. Staff leaving. Something about a bad shipment deal in Chicago that cost them thousands. Kayla's luggage line quietly shuddered. Apparently, she never figured out the actual supply chain side of things and didn't want to deal with the boring back end. Last I saw, her Instagram had shifted to self-growth content and inspirational quotes over filtered sunsets. I didn't celebrate their failures, but I didn't mourn them either. One morning in July, I got a call from my cousin Leo. He used to work in sales at my dad's company, but had quit a few weeks after I did. "You free for lunch?" he asked. "I have a story you're going to want to hear." We met at a tiny sandwich place near my apartment. Leo looked tired, but relieved. "They're hemorrhaging," he said, biting into a meatball sub. "Like full-on spiral. Your dad's been trying to act like it's just a rough quarter, but the books are brutal. Half the office knows it's only a matter of time. I nodded, sipping my coffee. I figured as much. But that's not the story, he added. You'll love this part. He leaned in. Your dad had a meeting with the bank last week, trying to renegotiate some loans. He brought Kayla. I raised an eyebrow. She tried to pitch herself as a co-CEO, Leo said, grinning. Talked about her visionary leadership and creative brand synergy. The banker asked her to explain the company's quarterly losses, and she just froze, completely blank. Then started talking about TikTok trends. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Hard. Leo chuckled too, then sobered. Honestly, I think he thought you'd come back by now. That you'd bail him out again. He doesn't know what to do without you. That hit deeper than I expected. He ever talk about me? I asked. Leo paused. Not much. But when he does, it's weird. Like he doesn't get it. Still thinks you're just being stubborn or taking things too personally. Like he never put the pieces together. I nodded slowly. That tracked. Dad didn't deal in reflection. Only projection. After lunch, I walked back home and sat at my desk, staring at the growing client list on my screen. It felt surreal. Just a year ago, I was invisible in my own family. Now I had something real. Something mine. But the thing that surprised me most? I didn't feel angry anymore. Not numb. Not bitter. Just detached. Like I'd finally stepped out of a storm I didn't realize I'd been living in for years. The company was doing well. I'd hired my first part-time assistant, a sharp, detail-oriented guy named Malik who reminded me of myself at 22. I told him, you won't go unnoticed here. Ever. And I meant it. I wasn't rich. Not even close. But I was stable. And every contract I signed, every system I built, every client who said, you actually listen, was another brick in the foundation I never thought I'd have. The rise wasn't dramatic. There was no movie montage or viral moment. Just grit, focus, and quiet victories. But honestly, that made it sweeter. Because it was real. Because it was mine. I still hadn't spoken to my dad since that night at the apartment. But that was about to change. Because one morning, I got a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A printed letter. In a manila envelope. Hand-delivered. It was from my father's lawyer. And it wasn't an invitation to talk. It was a request. No, a plea. And what it said inside made my stomach drop. The envelope was thick. Heavier than you'd expect for a simple letter, with my name typed neatly on the front. No return address. No branding. Just a single word in the bottom corner. Confidential. I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. Something about the way it was hand-delivered unsettled me. This wasn't a casual note. This was orchestrated. Deliberate. A move. Inside was a neatly typed document on legal letterhead from my father's longtime attorney, Charles Wexler. A man I'd only met once, years ago, during a client dinner where he spoke more like a PR rep than a lawyer. The letter opened formally, as if this was just a matter of professional interest. Dear Mr. Evan Price, I am writing on behalf of your father, Mr. Raymond Price, regarding an urgent matter pertaining to the continued viability of Price Logics Inc. Due to a series of unfortunate financial downturns, Mr. Price is requesting a confidential meeting with you to discuss a potential strategic partnership or transitional advisory role within the company. The meeting is proposed for Thursday, 11 a.m., at the Wexler and Associates offices. This conversation will remain strictly off-record unless mutually agreed otherwise. Please RSVP no later than Tuesday at 4 p.m. Best regards, Charles Wexler, ESQ. I let the letter fall onto my kitchen table and just sat there. A strategic partnership? After a year of silence, after I'd walked away with nothing, after he'd doubled down on Kayla and all but pretended I never existed, now he wanted my help? No, not just help. A private meeting. A plea for assistance disguised as a business transaction. I should have thrown it away, but I didn't. I spent the rest of that day pacing around my apartment. Not angry, just calculating. Because here's the thing about someone like my father. When he gets desperate, he gets sloppy. And if he was sending letters through his lawyer instead of picking up the phone himself, it meant he'd already burned his last match. This wasn't just a business problem anymore. It was survival. And somewhere along the line, the man who used to make me feel like I owed him my entire future now found himself on the edge. And I was the only person left with the tools to fix it. But I wasn't going to fix it. I was going to end it. Not with a tantrum. Not with some flashy revenge stunt. No, with precision. With leverage. With finality. I pulled out the old notebooks I'd used in the early planning days of Cornerstone. Tucked between budgeting spreadsheets and vendor lists were notes I'd made in the months after leaving Price Logics, scattered thoughts about client complaints, internal weaknesses, regulatory risks Dad had ignored for years. Things I'd once jotted down just to get them out of my head. Now they looked like blueprints. Over the next 2 days, I pieced together everything I knew. I made lists: vendors he underpaid, clients he overpromised, employees he bullied, government contracts that had lapsed, a warehouse lease in Tulsa that was being paid double market rate, probably due to some backdoor deal with a contractor friend of his. Every page I turned reminded me how long I'd kept that sinking ship afloat. I started making calls. Not malicious ones, not yet. Just quiet check-ins. First, to Malik. "How do you feel about expanding operations?" I asked. He was thrilled. Said he'd been waiting for the green light. Then to Mr. Porter. "Hypothetically," I said, "if Price Logics was on the verge of collapse, would you consider transitioning the rest of your logistics work to Cornerstone?" "Yesterday," he replied. By Wednesday morning, I had a list of clients who'd already peeled off from my father's company, and a second list of those who were looking for the exit door if only someone pointed the way. I compiled all of it into a folder labeled ACE in the hole. Then I confirmed the meeting. Wexler's office was in a downtown tower with mirrored windows and an air of old money. I dressed simple: dark blazer, no tie, clean-shaven. I wanted to look like someone you'd take seriously, but not someone trying to impress you. The receptionist smiled, buzzed me in, and directed me to a long, glass-walled conference room. Dad was already inside. He stood when I walked in, an old habit, one of the few manners he'd never shed. He looked thinner, paler. His suit hung on him like it was a size too big. For the first time in my life, my father looked tired. "Evan," he said, nodding. "Thanks for coming." I didn't respond, just sat down across from him. Wexler followed close behind, briefcase in hand. "Let's get started, gentlemen." They launched into a presentation, more of a plea dressed in bullet points. Revenue decline, 38%. Client retention, down 24%. 2 warehouse managers had quit in the past month. Their primary software was outdated, buggy, and I knew exactly why. I'd built half of it. The guy they'd hired after me tried to modernize things by rewriting core scheduling logic. It broke the back end, caused cascading failures, and now shipments were disappearing into black holes of pending dispatch. By the time they finished their pitch, I hadn't said a single word. Wexler folded his hands. "Your father is offering a limited-time equity package, should you agree to come on in a transitional executive role." "No," I said. Dad blinked. "You haven't heard the offer yet." "I don't need to." He sat back, mouth tight. I pulled out the folder. I brought something too. Inside were 2 neatly stacked documents. The first was a list of every known client I had proof was already shopping for alternatives. The second was a proposed partnership outline, not for Price Logics, but for acquiring its remaining assets under a Cornerstone expansion. Dad stared at the pages for a long time. "What is this?" he asked. "A lifeboat," I said. "For the parts worth saving. The brand's done. The leadership's a joke. But the infrastructure? The warehouses, the logistics network? That has value. And I've built a better system to manage it." He didn't respond. Just sat there, nostrils flaring. Wexler leaned forward, scanning the top page. "So you're proposing a hostile acquisition?" "No," I said calmly. "Hostile would be me calling every one of your vendors and clients tomorrow and telling them how unstable your operations are. This is mercy." Dad's eyes locked on mine. "You think you can take what I built?" he hissed. "I already did," I said. "You just haven't accepted it yet." The room went silent. Eventually, Wexler cleared his throat. "We'll review and respond within 72 hours. I nodded. "That's generous. But the offer expires in 48. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the air felt cooler, lighter. It was the first time I'd ever truly felt taller than my father. The next 48 hours were a blur of calls, contracts, and contingencies. I didn't know how he'd respond. I honestly expected rage, retaliation, maybe even an attempt to smear me in the industry. But what came next surprised me more than anything he'd ever done. And that is when the real game began. He didn't respond within 48 hours. That, in itself, told me everything. My father was many things: proud, egotistical, commanding, But above all else, he was stubborn. I knew he would wait past the deadline just to see if I'd flinch. He'd always believed he was the immovable object, and that the rest of us were meant to revolve around him. What he didn't understand, what he never understood, was that I'd already moved on. The moment I walked out of that birthday party, I stopped orbiting his world. And by the time I made the offer in Wexler's conference room, it wasn't a negotiation. It was a courtesy. So when the 48 hours passed without so much as a call, I didn't wait. I made my move. It started with a quiet press release from Cornerstone. Cornerstone Logistics is proud to announce the expansion of our client network and operations. Beginning this quarter, we will be onboarding 5 new major contracts from national retailers and distribution chains. We remain committed to delivering personalized, tech-forward logistics solutions with integrity and transparency. That press release hit just as PriceLogix's quarterly earnings were being whispered around industry circles. Everyone knew they were bleeding. Everyone knew they were vulnerable. I didn't mention their name. I didn't have to. The same afternoon, I launched a targeted digital campaign aimed at the businesses still working with my father. It wasn't aggressive, just factual. Testimonials from new clients. Case studies comparing delivery efficiency. A sleek side-by-side analysis showing how Cornerstone systems outperformed the industry standard. I posted one case study in a private logistics forum, where I knew managers from 3 of Dad's warehouses still lurked. By Monday, I got an email from one of his regional directors. Would love to talk options. Quietly. By Wednesday, 3 more followed. By the end of the week, a full-time dispatcher who had trained under me, before Dad promoted a family friend over him, submitted a formal application to Cornerstone. In his cover letter, he wrote, "I always believed in your vision. Just needed a door." I gave him one. Behind the scenes, I was laying the real groundwork, not just for a takeover, but for a dismantling. Using public records and internal contacts, I traced the paper trail of PriceLogix's remaining warehouse leases. A few were locked into long-term agreements, but 2 of their best locations were coming up for renewal. I made a quiet offer to the property owner, slightly above market value, contingent on the current leaseholders not renewing. He accepted. Just business. The following month, PriceLogix tried to renew both locations. Their applications were rejected. No explanation given. One of the properties was officially transferred to Cornerstone Logistics within 14 days. They didn't see it coming. And that was just phase 1. Phase 2 was about the vendors. I reached out to the ones Dad had burned, the guys he'd underpaid, dismissed, or treated like disposable tools. I offered better terms, clearer contracts, a commitment to fairness. Word traveled fast. In logistics, reputation is currency. And for years, PriceLogix had been coasting on old relationships I'd personally nurtured. Without me, those ties had frayed. Now they snapped. By mid-August, one of their longest-standing clients, a regional food distributor worth 7 figures in annual shipments, announced they were terminating their agreement. The press release cited inconsistencies in service and a desire for greater transparency. The next day, they signed with Cornerstone. That was the moment I knew the revenge had landed. Not as a firestorm, not as a headline, but as a quiet death. My father's company, the empire he built, the throne he ruled from, was collapsing in on itself. Not because I sabotaged it, but because he never knew how to keep it alive without me. And now the industry knew it, too. I didn't hear from him again until late September. It came in the form of a voicemail. His voice was flat, measured, like he was reading from a teleprompter in his head. "Evan, I heard about the contracts. About the leases. About the clients. You've made your point. I don't know if you feel proud of yourself, but I hope it was worth it." Then a pause. Just breathing. "You win." I played that message once, then deleted it. Because this was never about winning. Not really. It was about liberation. About finally stepping out from under the weight of a man who only valued control, and proving that I was never the failure he quietly feared I'd be. That his idea of the future of the family was nothing more than a fantasy built on favoritism and blind arrogance. Kayla faded from the picture not long after. Her luggage company had dissolved quietly over the summer. She posted a teary-eyed life update video about moving into a new phase of healing. Then she pivoted to wellness coaching, then travel blogging again, and eventually just stopped posting altogether. I didn't hate her. She was spoiled, yes, woefully blind. But she was raised in the same house I was. just on the opposite end of the seesaw. Dad gave her a pedestal before she ever had to earn a step. And in doing so, he broke both of us, just in different ways. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. Cornerstone kept growing. By winter, we'd expanded to a second state, opened 2 new fulfillment hubs, and crossed 7 figures in revenue. Not venture-backed, not celebrity-funded, just built the old-fashioned way, with work, trust, and consistency. One evening, I walked past a downtown wine bar and saw my dad sitting alone inside. Same gray suit, same slouch posture, just older now, smaller. He didn't see me. I stood there for a moment, watching him sip from a glass, staring at nothing. The same man who once toasted Kayla with "she's the future of this family" now sat in silence, the world no longer orbiting around him. And me? I walked past him, not out of spite, but out of peace, because I didn't need anything from him anymore. Not approval, not acknowledgement, not apologies. I already had everything he never gave me, and everything he tried to keep for himself. I had freedom. I had purpose. I had power. And I built it from the ground up, with nothing more than a silver keychain and a lifetime of being underestimated. That keychain still sits on my desk. I keep it there not as a reminder of the insult, but as a symbol of what happens when you stop grinding for someone else's dream and start building your own. Because the truth is, I didn't collapse when I walked away. They did, and I never looked back.